All right, welcome everybody. It's just after 6 o'clock, so I think we'll get this started. Welcome. My name is Dylan Tabish with Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and this is our virtual open house informational meeting for the Summers Beach State Park planning process that's underway. So thanks for the folks who are logged in to join us tonight, and we're also recording this. I'm going to share. Well, first, let's do introductions, and then I'll share my screen to get this PowerPoint started. We're going to go around and introduce our staff who are here tonight to help run through this presentation and virtual open house. So Dave, if you want to kick it off, please.
Yep. Hi, I'm Dave Landstrom. I'm the Region 1 Recreation Manager for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
Diane?
Hi, everybody. My name is Kyan Bishop, and I work out of our Helena office at FWP, and I serve as the Parks and Outdoor Recreation Planner.
And Randy?
Hi there. I'm Randy Rongley. I am a Design and Construction Project Manager in Region 1. I have the parks up there, so Summers Beach will be one of my projects.
Awesome. Kristen?
Hi, I'm Kristen Gill, and I work in design and construction, and I'm the landscape architect, and I get to work on all the state parks.
Awesome. And Rachel?
Hello, I'm Rachel Reckon. I'm the Heritage Program Manager for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and so I work in the west half of the state.
Awesome. Thanks all of you for being here tonight, setting some time aside for this virtual open house. Okay, I am going to share my screen and just run through a few kind of basic housekeeping things before I hand it over. Can you all see my presentation? Okay. So this is, like I said, our meeting here on the Summers Beach State Park planning process, which is underway. Dave is going to talk a little bit about kind of how we got here to today, but for the purpose of this meeting and why we're here is to really learn about this planning process for our new state park here on the North Shore of Flathead Lake, and hear where we are in that process and really gain a sense of what we've heard from the public through participation opportunities to date, and how we're gathering new input, and then what we're using that information for and how we're using it, and then to ask questions. That's really the key for tonight. Is this is intended to be a way for you to ask questions and engage with staff as we try to kind of fine tune some of the concepts and ideas we have for the state park on the North Shore. So please, anytime you have questions, don't hesitate to write them into the chat or to raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button at the bottom. We've got a website dedicated to this planning process and the new Summers Beach State Park. So all that information is going to live there, and all the information to date that we've been working on is on that page. So that's a good place to follow if you want to follow the progress of Summers Beach State Park. So this just is a Zoom kind of 101. This is being recorded and it will be posted on the Summers Beach State Park website that I just referenced. So you can go back and review things if you'd like. We have allocated time during the session for questions, so please don't hold back if you have questions. But if you do want to sit and think more on your questions, we're going to obviously have opportunities and contact information that you can reach out to staff after this meeting. So if something comes to mind after tonight, this isn't your final opportunity to reach out and connect with staff, learn more, and kind of provide input. So really tonight, as our in-person session is intended to offer the public opportunities to kind of express their preferences for amenities at our state park. So we're going to go through a few different kind of themes and ideas and topics that we're thinking for possibilities at Summers Beach State Park. So that's when we really are looking for that just conversation. So that's the stuff to start thinking about as we progress through these slides. So I'm going to kick this over to Dave now, who's going to kind of take it from here. So Dave, go ahead.
Thanks, Dylan, and I'll just let you know when I need to have you go to the next slide, okay? And forgive us, we've adapted this from an in-person open house last week. I think it'll work pretty well. And so we'll try to give you some opportunities along the way to share your thoughts on the ideas on the table. Just as a reminder of how we got to where we are, the Summers Beach property was acquired in October of 2021, last October. And we immediately followed up with a project to develop some interim amenities so that we would have some bare necessities for visitors in the park immediately. So in December of 2021, we issued that decision, and during the winter months, we developed some boundary marking. In fact, Randy worked really hard on developing some shoreline erosion control, actually a significant shoreline erosion control project. And then just just a couple of weeks ago, we opened the gate on the new parking lot there at the park. So we've got just basic parking, restroom, and some basic signage. But in March of this past March, we initiated the scoping process for the larger long-term development and plan for this park. And we did some virtual, some of you may have participated in some other virtual meetings in this same format. And then we initiated a survey, which went out to gather some baseline information. We provided us with a starting point in the planning process in regards to folks' preferences. In July, last week, we held an open house on site at the park. The folks who attended that saw much of the same information you're going to see tonight. And again, we gathered input, a little bit of a narrowing of scope of what we're asking and what we're collecting based on what we heard in the survey. And from these processes, I will move into the next phase, which is the development of an environmental assessment, which will include specific proposals for the public to review. And so at that point, we'll be getting quite detailed in providing a suite of alternatives for development of the park, with a goal of making a decision on that in December of 23. So we want to get through all of this work during the fall and winter months and have a decision ready to go at the beginning of the new year. Next slide, please. This material is Dylan said, it'll be online, so I won't dig too deeply into some of the material in these next couple slides, but know that if this interests you, you're welcome to go in and have a closer look. But the survey, the scoping survey that we put forth in March had a great response, close to 1,300 responses, with about 80% of those being from within Flathead Valley. And there's some other graphs here that just show you the demographics of age, gender distribution, and some other interesting information about how much people use state parks. Next slide. The survey was geared towards assessing some very important but basic baseline, and that will guide us in proposals for development of this park. And Montana State Parks has a classification system that we use to place our parks in categories that provide management directive, as well as it aligns visitor expectations with the type of park they may be looking for. So we do this with all of our parks. We classify them for management reasons. And in this case, the first prong to that classification is a service level designation. And that's essentially, how do you want a park to function? What do you want it to offer in regards to services and amenities? And our parks are classified as either rustic, core, or enhanced, with rustic being the least amount of amenities and the lightest level of development, and enhanced would be the higher level development. And in regards to the Flathead area, if you can think of Wild Horse Island, that would classify as rustic, whereas Lake Mary Renan State Park, for example, might be a core park, provides another level of amenities, and then Lone Pine State Park would be enhanced with a visitor center and those type of enhanced amenities. What we heard from the public was a preference for rustic first, followed by core. So essentially light development, but also with a nod toward a moderate level of amenities in the development scheme. Next slide. Next slide, Dylan. There we go. Oh, you skipped one, I think. I'm sorry, you didn't have, I had you skip ahead when you didn't need to. The second element of our classification is really aimed at trying to determine the setting and the experience that you would hope to have at this park. And as you can see here, there again, we have three options: a natural park, a heritage park, and a recreation park. The preference again was for natural, which is a setting that is really focused on view sheds, landscape, in lightly developed setting, followed closely by a recreational setting, which is a park that would give a nod a little bit towards recreational amenities that you typically associate with state parks, outdoor recreation, including fishing, camping, hiking, boating, etc. And it's always worth noting that all of our parks have elements of these classification settings. But what we simply asked in the survey is, what's your priority here? What is the priority and how you'd like this park to feel and function? Next. And it's worth noting, before we dive into a deeper discussion about what we heard from folks about the amenities that they would hope to see in a park and the amenities they don't want to see in a park, is that there are some base features that are kind of baseline for all state parks in our state park system. Some of these have been implemented already. Some of them are there, for example, the parking lot and entrance gate. But these are things that we simply need to add into all the proposals for basic function. And so, of course, an entry point, which will most likely include, some sort of a visitor contact location. We do that in any number of ways, but that's a place where people stop as they enter the park and learn, for example, what fees might be in place if there's camping associated, or if you're a non-resident entering a state park, there's a fee. We also post some other educational and information there. And oftentimes we have staff stationed there if the park, if the development necessitates that. We typically place at least one and sometimes two host sites in a state park unit, and that allows us to have staff on presence, seasonal staff on presence on site rather, and that provides all kinds of service. We're able to get some light maintenance accomplished through a host on site, as well as gate opening and closings if we have a night closure, for example. Those folks can oftentimes help us with that, but it's always good to have staff present on site during peaks of high use. Flush restrooms, we have the ability to do that at Summers Beach because we have connectivity to municipal sewer and water. And flush restrooms are very attractive to us because it's getting increasingly difficult to get vault latrines pumped, and we're having a hard time finding vendors who will do that. And so that eliminates that problem, and frankly, it's a more pleasant experience. And potable water is something we offer in most of our state parks, and we certainly would have that opportunity here. We will have trails in this park, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on. The trails will really be more determined by what we end up developing in the park. But what we have determined is the trails will be accessible. So that'll be a base feature of this park. There will be interpretive opportunities, and we'll determine as well what that looks like, but those are typically through a mix of programming such as, on-site programs, traditional signage such as the, interpretive reader panels that you've seen in other places. And then we use other delivery methods too, such as QR codes and some other delivery methods of interpretation. Picnic areas, at a minimum, we'll have, we're sure that there's going to be some place to have a picnic or to do some picnicking in this park. And we'll determine the location, size, number through this process. I think it's pretty fair to say that there's going to be a hand launch boat ramp. And what we mean by that is it's not a ramp that's going to offer trailer capacity or a concrete ramp or, the type of boating facilities that we have elsewhere on Flathead Lake or in the region. But it would be more in tune with something that would allow you to get close to the water and carry a small craft to the water. And then lastly, we've done a portion of park boundary delineation. We have marked the park's boundaries. We may also explore additional screening, such as vegetative screening, for example, in certain areas of the park to provide buffers for both neighbors and park users. Next slide. And we have some we have some guiding principles. I'll paraphrase, I'll run through these. You're free to read these in detail at your leisure. But it's worth noting that, we're extremely interested in accessibility, and this park gives us a good opportunity for that with the flat terrain. So accessibility is going to be a feature. Certainly public safety and the safety of our staff is a priority in site design. Goes without saying, natural resource management is going to be an important element of the design, and we know there are valuable and sensitive resources in this park that will help us guide development. Similarly, we have a duty to protect cultural and heritage and cultural, historic, and heritage resources, and we'll be very cognizant of that, particularly if we begin development. We've done surface survey work in the park, and there have not been any obvious surface cultural resources, that are clearly obvious on the surface, but that isn't always the case, and we may discover resources or cultural artifacts when we do work in the park. So we'll be on guard for that. Of course, design will have being the good neighbor ethos in mind. And needless to say, we want to be good neighbors, and we'll have neighbors to this park as we do with most of our parks. That'll be a consideration in design. And then lastly, with any design that we do, we've got to anticipate what the ramifications are for maintenance and operations and staffing needs and so forth. So that's always a little bit tricky because you don't have those resources in hand. Sometimes you got to get a project on the ground and then the resources follow. So we feel pretty good about financial resources, and we've had some really great partnership donations. The Flathead Land Trust and the Montana State Parks Foundation have both provided a really solid base of donor givings, and so we've got that in the bank, and we'll employ that as well. But we'll still need to think long-term about staffing and long-term resource needs. Next. And lastly, before we dive into the meat of this thing, is we are fully aware of the fact that we want to plan with the knowledge that we border the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Flathead Lake waterfowl production area to the east. And of course, we're very sensitive to the seasonal closure that's in place there for waterfowl nesting. And we've already begun discussions with the management of that facility on how we can assist them with notifying folks of that closure period and assisting them with getting the word out that there is a closure from March 1 through the 15th of July each year on that property. And of course, we need to be cognizant of and plan around the BNSF in holdings. There are two of them. The southern one, most commonly referred to as a swamp pond, is the one that is of great concern, probably the greatest concern to BNSF. And they've done extensive remediation there, and we'll need to be very careful that we don't disturb any of their work to protect and to safeguard against underground contaminants. Next slide. So getting into the meat of planning, what's going to be on the ground, what's going to be in this park. And I know that's what people are tuning in for to learn about. And so we relied very heavily on this for this presentation, as well as the open house last week, on the material that we gained and the information we gained through the spring survey. And for the sake of organizing that feedback into a usable format, we essentially have generated a list of amenities that showed the highest level of interest in the scoping effort. And we've broken them out into areas that we can consider, kind of take it in bites. And in the open house, we did these as stations. And so folks traveled through and had a look at the various different accommodations or ideas we might consider for overnight accommodations, should we choose to provide overnight opportunities. And then amenities that we would offer that are essentially land-based amenities and day use areas, as well as water-based day use area amenities. And please, again, we're not locked into any of these. Again, what we're doing is putting out some things to consider and to look at that are in line with what we heard about the public wanting the site to function as a rustic or core park with a setting that's natural or has a recreational emphasis. And so to that end, you'll see that these ideas are in line with that, with that classification system. Next. So the first one is a biggie. And that is the question of whether or not this park should be day use only or provide overnight accommodations. Most of the parks in the state park system in Region 1 anyway provide overnight accommodations, with some notable exceptions. Lone Pine State Park does not, Les Mason State Park does not, and Wild Horse Island does not provide overnight camping. The remainder of them do. In the case here, we asked survey, we asked folks in the survey to let us know, should the park be day use only? There was a pretty strong response. 61% indicated that was very important to them, that the park remain day use only. Whereas we also asked if we should allow camping. 55% said they did not want to see camping in this park. However, there was enough interest, of folks who thought that some level of camping might be appropriate or worth considering, but it was clear that they weren't interested in large scale RV type camping like we've offered in some of our other parks. So we simply put that out for consideration. We've got other modalities that we use for overnight opportunities, and we'll share those with you here, and we'll share with you the responses we received in our open house last week, and give you the opportunity as well to respond to those. So next slide, please. So some of the other things we do in state parks outside of RV campgrounds are rental units such as yurts, teepees, or cabins. We also have sites that are strictly reserved for tenting. So we have very simplistic natural rustic tent sites. And then in a couple of our parks, we also provide a shared hike in or bike in site. This could also be used for boat in. And that's what you see in the upper right, letter C, upper right corner there is, it's got a common area there, a common shelter, and then there are typically satellites of a half a dozen or so individual tent pads. And people come and go from those tent pads, and then they'll share the commons area, and there's typically food storage lockers there and a trash receptacle, and those are shared. And we also did provide that option still to say, no, I still don't want any overnight accommodations in the park, even if it's one of these. And we asked people to give us their thoughts on that. Next slide. And in this case, we said, if you didn't want camping or you still don't want any overnight accommodations, go ahead and mark that box, letter F, no overnight accommodations. If you think that you'd like to see overnight accommodations there, pick the one that of the other 5 that would be your first choice. Some folks said, well, I wouldn't mind, 2 or 3 of these. And we said, yeah, just pick the one that if you had to pick one, which one would it be? And as you can see, the tenting, both the natural and the hike bike site had the highest level of acceptance. Yurts, teepees, cabins were less popular, and a solid number of folks still said no overnight accommodations, please. Next. The next thing we asked then was, if you chose that you would like to or wouldn't mind anyway seeing overnight accommodations in the park, where would you place them? Bearing in mind that some places aren't suitable. Some of the property is wetland, some of it obviously is in holding. Some areas are clearly more suitable for development of overnight accommodations than others. Again, we have not made decisions as to if there would be overnight camping or where it would be, but we're interested to know what people think about the second piece, which is where would you put it? So if you'll go to the next slide, we actually had a map on site. We provided stickers and we said, place your yellow sticker on a location in the park where, if you were to see camping, where you would prefer to see it. And as you can see, nearly everyone clustered in 2 locations. So not real conclusive as to which site we would take, but at least we've narrowed it down to 2 locations based on that input. So we're still pondering this question. Your input will be important here in helping us develop alternatives. And Dylan, if you want to take a swing here at the audience participation place, this is one of the places now in the presentation where we'll get specific and give you an opportunity to weigh in in this format. And just before I do that, I will also share this, that at the end of the presentation, you'll see an email there it's my email. And so if your preference would be to ponder your thoughts a little bit longer and go back and review this presentation online and look at the material more closely, you can also email me with your comments. So there's really 3 different ways you can follow the instructions here that Dylan's going to read through, or you can email me at some point over the next day or so after you've digested this material a little more. So Dylan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so this is an opportunity now for anyone out there to comment on this topic number 1, overnight accommodations. If you have input on the type of camping you would be interested in having and the location, if you need me to go back a slide or 2 to show you again what the different options are, I can do that. You can type in your question or comment into the chat, and we will all see that, and I can read it aloud when you type it in there. Or you can raise your hand by down there at the bottom, clicking the raise your hand and I'll unmute you. So we'll just kind of pause here a moment and open it up for anyone to ask questions or comment. And I just realized chat is disabled, so that makes it kind of hard to chat.
Well, you're working on that too. I'll also add that we've got 3 more general topics like this, and we're gonna try to provide the same opportunity after each one. So this will just be one of 3.
Okay, so the chat should be working now. So go ahead if you'd like to, if you have a question you'd rather type in, feel free to type it in there, or if you want to raise your hand, I'll unmute you.
And Dylan, I'll also just add that if you want to simply put in your chat, I don't want to see camping, or I do want to see camping and I prefer this style of camping, you can essentially provide a written comment in the chat. We're saving this. We'll add this to the feedback that we received at the open house. And so you're welcome to use chat for that function as well. If you're not asking a question, just making a preference known. That's a fine use of chat as well. And you can do that anytime during the presentation. You don't have to, do it strictly on our prompting.
I think I'll go back to this one too, just to kind of remind folks of the different types we're talking about here.
And if you see none, Dylan, we can also we can move on to the next topic, but know that folks are welcome to enter into the chat at any point.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll just pause a moment longer.
Okay.
All right, not seeing anyone raising their hand or typing any questions in. Dave, I think we'll just keep this thing moving along. But yeah, as Dave said, if something comes to mind about the camping conversation, please type it into the chat or raise your hand, and we can always rewind to these slides. So that's the whole goal of tonight, is that it's structured to be relatively informal and fluid so that we can have a conversation with all of you about this process. So go ahead, Dave.
Yep, go ahead and jump to the next slide then. So the next thing we asked in the survey was, if we provided a suite of what are really land-based for the most part, day use, kind of associated with day use area amenities, although certainly if there's overnight stays, these are available to you as well. But these were a list of amenities that sort of fit the classification that we heard people feel this park belonged in, and we asked people to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 their desire to see or not see any of these amenities, with a 1 being very much opposed to or do not want to see in the park, and a 5 being something that you really want to see in the park. And we were a little bit all over the map on this. You can study this graphic at your leisure when you get a chance. But I think if you jump to the next slide, Dylan, what we really determined, what really rose to the top, and what we presented in the open house and are presenting tonight, are a few basic day use amenities that seem to have a reasonable amount of support, enough support to at least offer them up for your consideration. And again, you're helping us design this park. The public input is going to help us design this park. And so based on what we heard in the survey, these are things we feel comfortable in saying these might fit that that setting and classification. Nothing too radical here, obviously. Picnic areas, and we say area or areas plural. We could do multiple picnic areas. So we're asking folks about what they'd like to see in that regard. We commonly do reservable group use shelters. We have a number of these in the park system around in Northwest Montana, as well as across the state. And these can be any size, and they're typically reservable for group functions. Natural playground is something a little new to us. So when we said playground initially in the survey, we're assuming that folks were probably thinking about brightly colored apparatuses. And there's actually a kind of a cool movement towards these natural playgrounds, which, as you can see from the photo, are built out of pretty elemental pieces, wood, stone, etc. But they function as a playground. So there seems to be some interest in something along this line. And then even though amphitheaters didn't receive there didn't seem to be a lot of interest in amphitheaters, we want to be sure that we were being clear that we're not talking about a band show, but rather a small amenity, something like this one here that you see in the letter D, which is just a place to provide that interpretive programming if you're going to do that. It could even be smaller than this, but so a rustic amphitheater is another amenity that we're asking people to think about and consider. Next slide. And so similarly, we asked folks to place stickers on the amenities that they felt might like to see in the park, as well as that letter E, which is, I don't want to see any land-based day use or amenities, recreational amenities. We were a little surprised we got a 0 in that category. I figured somebody would say that, but there was pretty, not surprisingly, strong support for picnic areas of some sort, and then some moderate support for group use areas in a natural playground, a little less so for the rustic amphitheater. Next slide. And then, as is the case, we're asking a two-pronged question with these basic topics, basic amenity topics, which is A, which ones would you want to see or not? And secondly, where would you want to see them? So again, we provided a map that provided several options for where amenities might fit or might go in the park. These are just as to stimulate thinking about where you might put them. These are not decisions that we've made, just ideas for you to ponder. And once a determination is clear, as you see here, then that's when we're going to plan our trails and other features, to provide connectivity between parking and other amenities and other opportunities in the park. Next slide. And of course, we did ask where would you place them, and so here's a visual, and this was another sticker exercise where a blank map was provided. Folks who attended the open house were provided with stickers that were color coded, and we said, go ahead and design the park, put that stuff where you'd put it. And as you can see, there were some pretty obvious clusters, and then with the group use area and shelter, there were a lot of ideas on where those might go. I will add that the stuff that's been placed within the hashed line area would present some, it's not undoable, but it presents a little bit of a added design complexity because that ground is wet in there often for a good part of the year, particularly the closer you get to the lake. So again, here's another opportunity, as you see, to use the chat or to raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question about these particular clustering of amenities or this grouping of amenities, or make a comment. You're free to do so. We're happy to answer any questions you have. So Dylan, we'll take another little pause here, and then we'll jump into our third. Well, there's actually 4, but our third one that's got a real comment possibility.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so here's another opportunity to provide comments or questions on land-based day use areas. You can see it has a nice mixture kind of all around, all across the map, but your input certainly matters right now. So this is helpful for us to have this much engagement with the public. So we appreciate everyone who is engaging with us on this process. So there's a question from Lauren in the chat. What is the significance of the dotted hatch type? Yeah, good question, Lauren. See if Dave or someone would like to answer that one.
Randy, would you like to take that one, or Kristen? Kristen can
I
take
can
that.
answer. That's the little dotted part is actually the wetlands. What is it's the category of wetlands, and then the hashed part is, or the striped part is where we've identified as it's not wetlands, but it's muddy all the time.
Yeah, it's 100-year floodplain.
Yeah.
Yep. And so both areas really constitute wet, and the dotted area is, is what you would associate with wetlands. It's cattails mostly. So you'd literally be, placing something in cattails, which is doable. There, and there are some amenities that could, in the case of a boardwalk wildlife viewing platform, for example, that's something we could do sensitively in that location, but we are more limited in those two areas for sure.
Yeah, great question though, Lauren. Thank you.
Dave,
So
this is Cayenne. I was just kind of reviewing some of the feedback we've gotten, and I know we didn't really offer this up as a choice, but I did see a few folks that expressed interest in gazebos. In other words, maybe not something to the level of development of a group use area shelter, but a little bit more substantial than, say, just a picnic table. I was curious, I don't know if we had any of those at any of the sites up your way. So I just wanted to, I thought that might be another option that could be of
Right.
interest to folks.
yeah, that could be a much smaller sheltered picnicking area. We don't have any gazebos in this region. I know there are some in the park system. But certainly that would fit the rustic and rustic and core settings. So certainly an option.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I think
Yep.
that a few folks had suggested that just because there's a lack of shade
Yeah,
in
that's
some
right.
parts of the park. And so that would really be a nice amenity to have.
That's right. And there are other shaded picnic amenities like that small scale that of a whole variety of different sun shelters that I've seen in different park settings. And some of them are as simple as a single wall, slanted wall or shed roof style shelter for a single table. And I've seen those in a number of park settings, and particularly out east where the trees are a little less abundant. But Dylan, why don't we jump over to the next one we can get through, and then maybe, at the end, there'll be there's certainly opportunity for general questions as well. And the third major topic we looked at were just other amenities that were really water focused and water based. And, the biggie, the one that we've heard about for a long time even when we were considering the acquisition of this site earlier, several years ago, this was considered for a fishing access site. This property was, and there's been a lot of interest in the ability to get a boat to the water. A hand launch is what we call it, but a lightly developed access point for putting kayaks, rafts, john boats, small craft in that don't require a boat ramp. So our third station and our third topic here tonight dealt with amenities that we might provide on or near the water. I'm going to save the gravel beach one for last. The wildlife viewing platform is pretty obvious what we're looking at there. And that would be ability to combine both interpretation and wildlife viewing in a developed site. And this could be anywhere in the park, really. But it would be, if we boardwalked it, it would give us the opportunity to use some of those wetter areas. And I think it would largely be focused on flora, fauna, and potentially some cultural or heritage topics as well. The gravel beach is, it requires a bit of explaining. If for those who have been to the site or are followed this project in the papers through the winter, the department completed, Randy on this call put an awful lot of work into this project, which was a shoreline protection project for the entire shoreline, the entire park shoreline on Flathead Lake. And we were losing significant shoreline, up to 6 feet a year, and somewhere in some places worse, of shoreline, particularly during full pool. We'd get wave action and big storms, and we were literally washing that shoreline down the down the lake and down the river. So this is a technique that's been used widely on the lake, and it's different than riprap in that it protects wetlands and actually conserves wetlands by absorbing wave action rather than deflecting it. On the far west end of the park, on top of this dynamic beach, we call it, or gravel beach, we added a layer of washed rock, which is a smaller, smoother, more consistent sized rock. It's not as nice as a sand beach, but it's easier to utilize than the remainder of the dynamic beach, which is built with a whole lot of larger, more odd shaped stone and rock and gravel. So one of the things we asked is, would people be interested in seeing additional footage of what we call recreational beach, the gravel beach with a top dressing that makes it a little friendlier to use for picnicking and swimming off of, etc. So if you have questions on that, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. But that's a question we asked, is would you care to see more of that usable gravel beach on the park's shoreline? So if you go to the next slide, please. Again, we asked people to place stickers on those amenities that they'd like to see. And as you can see, all three of those were pretty popular, with at least with the folks who placed stickers. And bear in mind that not everyone visited every station at our open house. And not everyone placed, even everyone who did visit did not necessarily place stickers, but we still saw a pretty strong response to all three of these ideas. And again, we had no one say, please don't provide any additional water-based day use amenities. So that's useful information there. And we ask the same of you, again, either here in this meeting or later in your comments to me, if you'd like to weigh in on this topic. We'd really like to hear what you have to think, or if there are other waterfront amenities that we haven't proposed here, we're interested in hearing that as well, of things that might interest you. Next slide. Again, we need to find location, and again, we offered some examples of where those locations might be. We haven't made any final decision, but we've got locations on the west side of the park, which certainly would be suitable for a hand boat launch. That actually gravel beach area already exists, so we're really not asking any, we're not suggesting adding more there because we've already done it. But if you look from the BNSF shop property that's shaped a little bit of like a horseshoe there. Everything traveling north and east of there is park shoreline. And so any of that would be suitable for placement of an additional top dressing layer. It would take significant permitting and work again. We have to be very careful when we're working in the shoreline area and in wetlands area. So, but we're trying to find out if there's enough interest to even consider it. So we again provided a blank map. You'll see on the next slide. We asked folks the same questions we've been asking all along, which is if you wanted any of these amenities, where in the park would you prefer to see them? We were there for a second, Dylan, it bounced back. There we are. Yeah, so the one thing that was really clear is that folks, if people want to see a wildlife viewing platform, there is a great interest in placing it sensitively in the existing wetlands, the cattail region of the park. So we did see a pretty clear message that folks would like to see that amenity. And then it seemed to be a pretty strong interest in at least a partial enhancement of the gravel beach. And that, if you've been to the lake since we opened the park, that is where people are typically walking out to the lake now. So it makes sense that they would call that out as a good place to place additional gravel on the gravel beach, and that is also a location that's suitable for a hand launch. So no clear choice on the hand launch. It looks as though that was pretty evenly split of the folks who were at our open house. One more time here, opportunity to weigh in, ask any questions on this, on this clustering or this group of water-based day use amenities. And we're happy to pause here yet again and answer any questions you might have about this element of the design. And Cayenne, please add any question, anything that you want to add, by all means. I know you are real familiar with this topic as well.
Yeah, so maybe just a couple things that I know that I heard at the open house, and then also in just kind of the review of comments, was just kind of the need to, kind of think about, and you mentioned this, Dave, the co-location of how we get people to the beach, and I know we're going to talk about trails soon, but just so folks here on the call are also aware, I think as soon as we have some determinations about where some of these key things could go, that will then enable us to do a lot more in terms of kind of planning for what a trail or access to the beach would look like. Is there a parking lot? Is there just simply a wide enough trail that people could, take things down and say a cart or what have you? So just want to reinforce to folks here that that is on our mind. You're not really seeing that quite yet. But there was a lot of interest there. And then I was really kind of interested in just seeing the abundant support for the wildlife viewing platforms. And we're calling them wildlife viewing platforms. There's a number of ways we could utilize some of those kind of what are really kind of also interpretive opportunities as well. So not just to kind of be thinking about what those kind of signage examples and things could happen on that boardwalk. There's a number of things we could really do there. And it seemed as though there was a fair amount of support, again, both at the open house and then for something like that through our scoping survey.
Yep, for sure. All right, well, why don't we jump into the final topic really here, and then we'll provide a little time here at the end of the presentation for just a more general discussion or any questions that folks might have in general. And this was a fourth station, and it is a fourth topic here, a fourth station in the open house last week, and we mimic that here. We approached this one a little bit differently in that we're not asking you to place location of trails if you wanted them, because again, we're going to determine that once we know what is going on the ground, and the trails will be intended to provide connectivity within the park, to get you from point A to point B, and also to provide trail opportunities, hopefully. And then interpretation will most likely be tied pretty closely to that, because oftentimes trails get you to the interpretive stations, or we provide interpretation along a trail. So there are a few considerations beyond what I just mentioned when we talk about trails and interpretive approaches, and some of that we've already addressed, which is that we need to plan around areas of the park that are sensitive, such as flood prone areas and wetlands. Doesn't mean we can't do trails there, but we've got some different considerations. Oops. Yeah, we're gonna try we really have a strong commitment to developing a trail system that's accessible. And once again, we have a park that's flat. We don't always have that in the Flathead, as you know, and so we've really got an opportunity in this case to develop accessible trails and opportunities. And we'll in the future, when we've got a park development in place, that's when we'll begin to dive into what stories we want to tell in this park interpretively. And of course, there's a whole host of opportunity there, and we'll talk more, but we did try to gauge a sense of how people would like to see that material delivered. And we'll get into that here in a little bit in the next slide or two. So if you could go to the next one, please. I should add that we also tried to get a feel for the type of trail use that folks would like to see in the park. And we're going under the assumption that this is going to be non-motorized trail use, given the size of the park. It's quite small. It's 106 acres, I want to say, and much of that is either lake bed or wet. So we really asked folks about their preference to see pedestrian use, bicycle use, or equestrian use. And so we did ask that question. Next slide. And we asked folks to react a little bit to the various different types of trails we can provide. I'm sure you've all seen a wide variety of trails. There are certainly more than what we're presenting here, but generally speaking, there are boardwalk trails, and we would need to do that most likely in any wet areas. There are, of course, any variety of gravel surfaced or aggregate trail surfaces, and there are a variety of different types of aggregate materials you can build trail with. Of course, there's asphalt or concrete trails, and we've got those in the valley. And then there's bare earth, we're calling it, or native tread is another term for just what you see there, a footpath. And so any or all of those, or a combination thereof, are likely. The bare earth trails provide a little bit more of an accessibility challenge, just due to width and surface, but they're all on the table at this point. Next slide. And once again, we asked folks to react to these different options of user types and material. And this graphic tells you what we heard. There weren't any big surprises here. If we go to user type, certainly a strong preference for pedestrian. There was some acceptance of bicycle use, a little less favorable to equestrian. But I think we can explore that down the road as well, since I know there's an interest in equestrian there. But at least of the folks who have responded thus far, equestrian trails were not high on the list for preferred. Material wise, a lot of interest in those boardwalk trails. So, of course, that would apply only to the wet areas. And then a real strong interest for the footpath, the bare earth trails, not as much support for surfaced trails. I did lie. There's actually 4 opportunities to weigh in here. There is a 4th opportunity here. And so for the 4th and this time, final time, at least in this format, we'll pause here for anybody that's got a question or wants to raise their hand and speak or weigh in. And we'll wait a pause for a couple of moments here. And if none, then we'll wrap up. We'll conclude the presentation and see if there are any general questions at the end.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, we'll pause here. And
Cayenne, anything to add?
I think that, I was really struck by the number of individuals who've really offered support for these trails definitely being accessible. And you've seen us use the language in some of these slides as universally accessible. Just to kind of be very clear, that definitely kind of includes a lot of the ADA kind of considerations that many people are familiar with. And so I know that that is not important just for the trails, but also as we even think about some of the other amenities that Dave covered. So I want to reinforce that we're thinking really broadly, and we really are excited about having an opportunity to make this a site that really truly is accessible to people of all ages and all abilities, and really thinking creatively about what that can look like.
yeah, good call, Cayenne. Thank you. And we have a great question from Lauren again here, and I'm going to read it out and let you, Cayenne, and Dave take a crack at this, and actually maybe Randy as well. Lauren has a question. Seasonal high lake levels bury the gravel beach. Assuming from the parking lot there is a bare earth trail, could a boardwalk begin at the 100-year floodplain extending toward the lake to a wildlife viewing platform, where a seasonal floating dock could be affixed to the platform for boat launching during high lake levels? Interesting idea.
I'm happy to
for
take
you
that
all.
one. That's a really
Yeah.
interesting question, and a really neat question. At first blush, and Randy, jump in if I'm all wrong, but I think something like that could be considered. We haven't been talking about a dock per se in this park to date. We typically have associated docks with our more developed boating facilities, but it's not out of the question. There's certainly, and you're right that the at Full Pool, most of the dynamic beach is by design is mostly submerged, and there are a few ribbons of it that remain above ground, and as you've seen, people are finding those and using that as a nice picnicking and swimming place, and so the enhanced gravel beach like we have on the west side actually makes a little more of that usable at Full Pool. But I think certainly your idea is worth consideration. I think there's a good chance we'll see some boardwalk trail through that 100-foot or through the 100-year floodplain, regardless of what we offer at the other end of it, even if it's just to get you to the lake. And certainly it seems reasonable that you could tie in a wildlife viewing platform. And I think I saw an addition to your chat there about paddle boards, or I just saw something flash on the screen. But I think that's a conversation we could have, is could we provide some sort of an amenity there for, a floating dock, that's not intended for it wouldn't be the big ones that we put in most of our parks, but it could be something smaller that allows you to access on a small boat or a hand carried boat. It's a great question. And I would encourage you to actually maybe, if you have some further thoughts, or if you want to do a napkin sketch and email it to me, and the address we're going to provide you here at the end, that would help me be sure that I understand exactly what you picture when you say that. But that's a great question. Thank you.
Hey, Dave, I noticed that someone actually put a blue dot for wildlife viewing platform on the poster in the water. So
Oh, yeah.
I think that they intended that to be something like a dock, which would
Yeah,
be
that's a really interesting idea. There'd be some engineering questions there for Randy and her group. given the lake fluctuation and there you go. Yeah, I see that one, right, yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's that, and I'm sure that was intentional, I mean, that's a
Yeah.
really interesting idea. And we did, one other thing I should raise that we talked about at one time was, before the discussion of more of an enhanced beach was, simply another sort of a spit or a bump out in that gravel beach design, which would provide some ground that stayed, that actually was usable at full pool. And that could also function then maybe along the same lines as the floating dock. So some sort of a man-made but natural looking feature there that would give you access to the water at full pool. And certainly that could be a combination wildlife viewing and with other uses, but great suggestion, great idea.
Yeah, Lauren wins the imaginary prize for
Yeah, that's
sparking a really cool idea.
yeah.
And her comment, Dave, was as a paddleboarder, that would be really cool and easy to navigate from car to lake. So certainly something you've brought up, yourself, Dave, and it's a really good point of trying to figure out how to make it as simple as possible for the hand launch.
Right. And I saw Lauren's comment there. She's an engineer, so she probably has a pretty good idea what's at stake there and trying to put something like that together, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility, I think. All right,
Well, yeah, I'll go back to where we were, and if anyone else is inspired with ideas, I mean, like I said, we can go backwards to other slides, or
let's just about finish with this topic. And the last thing we were really looking into is on this fourth topic was has to do with our interpretive planning, and this is a little bit early. We won't really get into the design and placement of interpretive amenities probably till a little further down the road, but we did want to get a sense for what type of delivery people like to see in regards to interpretation. And I think a lot of us think of traditional style reader boards, and we can probably all picture where we've seen these before. Another tool that we use a lot lately are QR codes, which really you get your interpretation through your phone. The beauty of these is they're simple, inexpensive, and you can change them. So they can be dynamic in the messaging. Letter C is is kind of a blending of art and interpretation, and certainly I've seen several examples of that. And then we do provide some interactive design. We do a lot of this in our visitor center parks, and so we did ask folks to weigh in on if they had a preference for any of those interpretive delivery methods. And I see Lauren's got another comment. Let's jump to this next slide, and we'll show you what we saw from folks, and then we'll take a look at the comment there. And this is this was just essentially a gauge of, if you had to pick, what would you prefer to see in terms of interpretive delivery. And I was a little surprised that traditional interpretive panels was pretty strongly the top, seemed to be the most popular. And I was surprised by that. But anyway, again, we'll use this information further down the road, but this was the last question we were seeking input on. Dylan, there was, could you see what Lauren had, the question?
Yeah, Laura asked a general question about if we're going to have another survey for folks who didn't attend the in-person open house or this virtual one. And I don't think we are.
No, I can answer that. And no, I mean, we're not planning another survey. Given the timeline we're operating under, we feel like we've got a pretty rigorous public input process, and we still got more additional opportunity for public input beyond this meeting. So I don't think we're going to try to conduct another survey. We did get a really strong response in the first one. It's really been guiding us to this point. But what we see through what we receive through the open house, as well as the comments that will continue to trail in as we begin the process of condensing and formulating alternatives, will all be incorporated into those alternatives, and we'll begin a process soon. Hopefully, we'll be putting a document back out for public review this fall, which will have synthesized all of this material into design alternatives, and I'm sure we'll offer, somewhere at a minimum of 3 different design options, potentially more, and there'll be another round of public input gathering in that process too. So we're not planning another survey, but we are planning more public input.
Great, thanks, Dave. Yeah, any questions or comments out there about trails and interpretive approaches?
Dylan, this is Kyan. I might just chime in here one more time. I don't know that we've actually mentioned this yet, but we're really excited as a planning team to have had the chance to talk a little bit to some of the representatives from the Confederated Salish Kootenai tribes. And I know that just initially, as we've been talking about some of our planning process and some of the ideas and presented some of these concepts, there definitely was interest in potentially collaborating on thinking about kind of some of the trails and interpretive aspects of the park. And we're, already kind of thinking about, for instance, some opportunities for naming, really even engaging some of the tribal elders in potentially thinking about how we might be able to share some stories that they feel comfortable with us doing that with. So just want to offer that is a really exciting aspect of this planning. I mean, it's all exciting, but that's one that we sometimes have not seized as we've gotten going on some of these planning efforts. So definitely more to come on that.
Yeah, great point. And a follow-up question from Laura, how long can people still give input similar to that asked for at the open houses?
Well, I'll actually address that here on our last slide. We've just kind of got a wrap-up slide that's next, two wrap-up slides, and I'll address that very question following this slide that's up right now. So I'll do some more paraphrasing here, but we do want to call out the fact that our desired long-term vision, our desired outcomes for a long-term vision and development plan are based on the following goals. And I think, I think we're seeing this come to fruition. We want to provide a good cross-section of community values and desires as they relate to the development of this park. And obviously, we're hearing, there are a wide range of thoughts on how the park should be developed. So we want to provide a good cross-section of those values. We want to identify desired park settings and level of service and amenities that are consistent with our state park classification policy. And so we have folded this park into that classification process, and that will help us guide the management of the park into the future. We want to establish clear guidance for the protection and management of important natural, cultural, and recreation and scenic resources. And that is consistent with our department's mission, and we take that seriously. And we want to recommend educational interpretive approaches that, that broaden the visitor's knowledge and appreciation of the area. And this is an area that has got a rich history, both of, post and pre-settlement. And so we have a lot of stories we could potentially tell in this park. And we want to promote access for all visitors and provide for the safety and wellness. So we want a safe and accessible park. We know that needs to be an outcome. And, the desired outcome is that we provide a basis really for guiding agency capital investment, or capital investment in development and operational and staffing levels. So these are important outcomes. It kind of goes without saying, but we think it's worth mentioning. And if we're successful in the end, we'll have ticked all of these boxes. So if you go to the next question to Lauren's question, this presentation will be online, and folks are welcome to go on and view that. I don't know if we're going to set a sunset on it, other than that, over the next couple of weeks, we'll begin to synthesize the material we have to begin to develop more formalized alternatives. So I think, loosely put, we don't turn down comments. So as long as they're still, as long as they're received, in time to find their way into the mix, we'll accept them. And so I think that we've got some time ahead of us here over the next couple of weeks while we pull together and organize this material and synthesize it. And you'll see here on the next slide that you can reach out to me directly, and there's an email there on the next slide. You can send your comments or concerns to me directly at that email. You can go on to our webpage, which is this URL here, brings you on to the Summers Beach Planning webpage, and all of our materials from day one are on that page, from all of the process that we've been through and the acquisition and development of the park. It's all there for your review, including this. We'll have a link to, and Dylan will speak to that, but we'll have a link to this presentation as well, and you can go on and click through it yourself as well. So Lauren, we don't have a firm date on that, but certainly there's time if you want to put more thought into it. If you know of others who might want to view the slide presentation and provide some input, we'd be happy to get that. So I think this is an opportunity then, for just more general question and answer. If there's anyone else that or anybody that's got any other questions or comments, we're all yours, and you can simply unmute or raise your hand and Dylan will pull you up, or you can use the chat as we've been doing. And Dylan, Cayenne, please add anything you'd like. This is sort of the end of the formal presentation, and so we've got time to be informal for a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Great job. Yeah, any questions or clarifications needed, or need to go back to previous slides? That is all on the table, so please don't be shy.
Dave, Dylan, this is Cayenne. I don't think I have any other input, so just we'll maybe go with the questions that people might have.
Okay, and here's another idea from Lauren. Could have a lightly developed spot in the northeast part of the property for small weddings. Gorgeous views per your current slide. That's a really cool idea. Yeah, that might be some good parks earned revenue opportunities there too, Dave. Let's go back to
that could work its way into that could also be blended with some of the other amenities we've talked about, such as a rentable group use shelter, for example. I was a little surprised that in these earlier, for example, great slide, exactly that one, we didn't get any suggestions for placing amenities up in the northeast corner. That's the big alfalfa field, for those of you that are familiar with it. It is a big, flat, usable space. Obviously, view shed there is a critical resource that we want to conserve. So we'd need to really be cognizant of that. But that's certainly a valid idea, and it fits within the setting that we've identified for this park. So another great suggestion.
Yeah, Lauren, are you available to join the planning team?
Yeah.
Maybe that's how we use our gazebos as well. I know that that seems to be a common backdrop for wedding pictures.
Well, that raises a really interesting question in that, you know, any or all of those things could sort of serve that function. The gazebo idea, the small, a small amphitheater, for lack of a better term. There's probably a better term than amphitheater, but you know, a small gathering area with seating, or a picnic shelter. Those could serve multiple functions, including small gatherings like that. We do that in the state parks quite a lot. We have a special use permitting process where we can you know, accommodate reasonably sized gatherings. And in some of those parks, you know, that's a fairly small cap. You know, so, you know, we can take that into account in a park this size as well. You know, what size gatherings would be suitable in this park. So that's a really good option to consider in day use amenities.
As someone who got married in the Flathead a few years ago, there are not very many affordable places, so this would be probably celebrated by a lot of people.
We do get a lot of requests for ceremony locations. We do a lot of them, actually small ones, in places like Lone Pine and Wayfarers. And we get a lot more requests that we can't accommodate due to the size or the location requested.
Very good. Well, other ideas or thoughts or comments out there?
Well, I'll keep a close eye on my email. I'm sure that there'll be some more good material that comes in via email. And also folks are welcome to call me. My phone number is there as well. And if you just want to call and chat, you're welcome to do that as well.
Yeah. I think we will wrap up here. We're at about almost 7:30, and just really appreciate the folks who were able to take a little bit of time out on a Thursday night in summer to join us for this virtual open house, and then you know, all the folks who participated at the in-person open house. Been a really fun process, and truly, as tonight I think shows, you know, getting all these great ideas from our public is how we are going to make Summers Beach State Park just an amazing place for all. So really appreciate everybody engaging here tonight. And this presentation, this video will be on the Summers Beach Planning State Park page tomorrow. And then this PowerPoint presentation, I believe we're going to put up as well. So please, as Kyan said in the chat, feel free to share this far and wide. We want as many folks as possible to help us in this planning process. So I will wrap up from there and say thanks again. And Dave, you have any parting words?
Nope, much appreciated, and stay tuned. We're up and moving, so we'll have some good stuff out there for you. And that most likely you'll see a draft EA sometime this fall. So much appreciated.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone. Have a great night and adios.
Okay, see you later.